This guy, across the English-speaking world, he is the envy of every media outlet when it comes to anything related to the law and decoding so many of the complexities regarding court cases and the law itself. How about it for the guy who was a former federal prosecutor? Now he is the defense attorney extraordinaire. He is our David Katz. Yeah. Hello, sir. Thank you for being here. David, first of all, let's dispense with the Trump stuff. What's happening? Everything's been parked, but and you addressed a bit of that last week, but there is an effort now to try to get Judge Cannon, who's handling the documents case in Florida, who clearly is a concierge judge for Donald Trump. There's an effort now to try to get her removed. You've spoken before about how difficult this might be. But could you speak to this effort to actually try to get her removed from the case?
Well, the joke is that if Trump wins, not only will the case be dismissed by Trump's new attorney general, but she'll be promoted to the appellate court. But you have to assume that that's not what's going to happen, that Trump ends up losing. Which after the debate, I think is a North Star that you can see pretty bright in the heavens. I thought that Kamala Harris did such a wonderful job, and Trump did such a poor, he acted like the loser. I hate to say it because I'm older, but he's past his prime. All of us hit our expiration date. I'm trying to be very far from it. And I know a lot of your listeners and viewers are too, working, being very productive, But Trump's not one of them. He was all the things he accused Biden of. I think you could see him manifesting them, as well as getting terrible advice and not being able to resist any of the bait that very artfully Kamala Harris put out there, so that he could, he could self-destruct in a way that people could see just how destructive he is to himself and to the country. But getting beyond that, looking at these cases, every case I think depends on whether Trump gets elected again or not. So we start with the case down in Mar-a-Lago. He's clearly guilty. If anyone is guilty, he not only took those documents, he lied about it, he obstructed justice, he got one of his attorneys, allegedly a judge found, more likely than not, that he was having his lawyer commit crimes. He was having his lawyer, knowingly or unknowingly, lie to the authorities, got called into the grand jury to testify how he'd sort of done the shell game, and wherever they were looking, that's not where the documents were. And he gave the impression to some of his employees that all the documents were there, and they weren't. You remember some were in bathrooms, some were all over the place. They had these bright, shiny labels on them, so you could tell very well that they contained highly classified documents. And yet with all of that, she dismissed the case on the basis that Trump supposedly has a special prosecutor appointed unlawfully, that Jack Smith is paid unlawfully. And courts have looked at that issue over and over again, but usually in Washington, D.C. And we've talked about the fact that Jack Smith, by not bringing the case in Washington, D.C., where there was perfectly good venue, invited a 1 in 3 chance that he would get her, who not only seems like loose cannon, biased in favor of Trump, looking for a higher appellate judgeship from him. That's sure the way it looks. But on top of that, there is pretty unsettled law. There's not a lot of law in that circuit about these special prosecutor appointments. And so she could say, well, there's not really any law in the 11th Circuit. Now, people think there's very clear law in the U.S. Supreme Court that they have an argument about a footnote or about some reference, and was it really dictum? In other words, was it not really decisive to deciding that case? Was it just a comment made by the Supreme Court justices? But again, almost all the scholars believe that it has been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court, but she wiggled around, said it hadn't really been decided by the Supreme Court, hadn't been decided by the 11th Circuit. So what these very distinguished lawyers have done is they've entered the case as what's called amicus curiae, friends of the court. And they've made an argument that Jack Smith is rightly reluctant to make, because if he asks that this judge be removed, he's attacking the judge. He may attack the judge, and as they say, if you come for the king, kill the king. Don't wound the king and have the king deciding what to do with you, sitting there wounded by you. So the idea is that they would inflict kind of a wound on her personally by saying that she was unfit and should be removed. And then voila, she's reversed, but not removed. So they feel, Mark, that they can say to the court, here's all the reasons why you should remove her. All my Katz on this is that she will be reversed, but she will not be removed, because normally judges are not removed from a trial based on their ruling. And right now, the new aggravating factor, I know she's been reversed twice before regarding the search, but the only aggravating factor, and it's true, it's a third strike, is that she got this decision wrong. And I think the court would say, well, she got it wrong, but it wasn't that clear in the 11th Circuit. There are some people who argue about the Supreme Court, so we don't see it the way that she did it, and they're going to send it back to her. Which, again, the only way they would send it back to her, Mark, you have to assume that Trump loses the election. And then I think it will be a whole different kettle of fish. I have such high opinion of just about all the federal judges in the country, but honestly, not of her. But I think that she'll be less craven because I don't think there's any other, even Republican president who's ever going to appoint her to anything. So once she realizes that she's going to be sitting there in Fort Pierce for the rest of her life on that district bench, I think she's going to really try hard to get this one right the fourth time. I mean, what's her upside once Trump's lost to continue to be the last stock of the legal world?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, it would be such a reversal, I mean, of loyalty. All of a sudden, she's loyal to the law instead of to the man. But this is interesting just as because it was the special prosecutor that was the ruling that she was trying to honor. No Contendo says 45 isn't arguing that the special prosecutor and legitimacy of the special prosecutor against Hunter Biden. So, yeah, they're very selective in when they argue with this. Yeah.
Can I mention that for 1 second? The Hunter Biden, actually the attorneys, I think Lowell, what's his name? Abby Lowell for Hunter Biden. Made that argument in the district court right here, a judge that I've appeared in front of and I have high regard for. He made sort of the argument that your commenter is making. Aren't those just two peas in a pod? And the judge actually got upset and said, don't argue to me that those are two peas in a pod. You know better because you've done your homework. And the argument goes like this, that Weiss was a U.S. attorney appointed by, nominated by Trump, but then approved by the two Democratic senators. He's kind of a consensus pick back when he was the U.S. attorney. What Biden did was to not look political like his U.S. attorney was making a decision. He kept the same Trump-appointed, Democratic approved U.S. attorney, Weiss. And so the argument goes that Weiss is not exactly in the same situation. He's an ongoing U.S. attorney, then appointed as special prosecutor. I know I'm way inside baseball, and that supposedly Jack Smith is a different creature. I think all of them are properly appointed. But, you know, under this unitary idea, this is what people, they realize it and they're horrified by it. And I don't know what we're going to do about it except put more members on the U.S. Supreme Court. This presidential immunity decision is so bad that a president could drop the special counsel. He could just fire. People always say, well, my God, what's going to happen? President comes in, realizes he has presidential immunity. Remember, he could jack up that guy from number 6 or 7 at the Department of Justice and make him the head over everybody else and put out a phony story. That can't even be prosecuted. That can't even be mentioned in a court prosecution of a former president. Okay. So what that means, Mark, is that, you know, what goes around comes around. And, you know, I don't think that Kamala Harris has a bone in her body, which is like almost all the corrupt bones in Trump's body. But the reality is that anybody on either side now, as that ruling stands, could fire the U.S. attorney. People say, well, my God, they could also impeach the U.S. attorney or the attorney general. Mark, think about this. If there's a unitary executive and the president can't be punished after his or her term, right? They have anybody in the Department of Justice start prosecuting their political enemies. Sure. They start prosecuting their political enemies. That's what the U.S. Supreme Court said is not prosecutable. So in our system of checks and balances, if it's not prosecutable and you can't do anything about it, that's the end of the check and balance on that. It's really the end of the checks and balances on on presidents, because anything they can, you look at this right now, this all the things they did with the Department of Justice are off limits. In other words, firing your attorney general for not prosecuting your political enemy and having some hack in the Department of Justice prosecute your political enemy is something that the president can't be indicted for, right? While he or she is the president. That was that memo, the famous memo that held Mueller back. And now they can't be prosecuted after their term under this presidential immunity. It's a core presidential responsibility to run the Department of Justice and prosecute whoever the hell you want to. And that's why prosecutors and former prosecutors of all stripes are really horrified by that U.S. Supreme Court decision. And I know I'm always saying the same thing, Mark, but you're not going to reverse it. Those 5 or 6 are not going to vote the other way. They're not going to reverse their own precedent. Dobbs was one thing to reverse that 50-year-old precedent. They're not going to reverse their own precedent. So unless there's new members to the U.S. Supreme Court, we really are going to have an imperial presidency that can go after its political enemies. The very thing that Nixon couldn't do is now carte blanche. You can't be prosecuted for it while you are president, and you can't be prosecuted for it after you're president.
You know, as I've said before, in my movie, which we do after this immunity ruling comes down, the president, the sitting president, who's actually in the opposing party, it's just like now, says, great, presidential immunity, you're setting it up to protect your guy over there, Donald Trump. I'm going to now arrest 3 of you Supreme Court justices because, and I can do it for whatever reason. I've declared you an enemy of the state, ethical violations, we're going to litigate it, whatever it might be. In my movie, that's the way the final act comes. Everybody bursts in, they actually arrest these corrupt judges, and you restore the Supreme Court to some kind of neutrality. So my question is, that's my movie. Could you actually remove a Supreme Court justice using this new power as the unitary executive?
That will not happen.
I know it won't happen. I'm just curious whether the hypothetical works.
That will not happen because everyone is too much of an institutionalist. Even Trump, if he were back in power, would not remove, if the Supreme Court were close, that headache in history, the thought of what people could do with the military really back you up, with the Marshal Service back you up. I mean, I suppose we'd have a situation worthy of the Civil War. There's a lot of people
that's as close to a coup as you would get that way, using the Justice Department.
There are a lot of people who protect the U.S. Supreme Court justices. There are marshals and so forth. There's police officers, I think, who are committed to that. There'd be a standoff at the Supreme Court. Nobody would be worried about how it looked, like they were worried about, some people were worried how it would look to have that army at the Capitol. Of course, they were also worried, came out during the debate, or a response to what came out during the debate. Pelosi, to the extent she had any power to bring any National Guard or anybody over to the Capitol, would have had to get McConnell's approval because he was the head of the Senate at the time. So that all seems very unlikely. But assuming Pelosi could have gotten McConnell's approval and gotten some people there before this demonstration got as bad as it was, and then so there are 10,000 National Guard controlled by Trump, controlled by those people that he was putting into the Department of Defense at the last minute who seemed like loyalists. Who knows what they were going to do with those troops? Would those 10,000 troops have ever left? Would Trump have just said, my God, there's so much commotion over the count and over the transition of power. We can't do it right now. We can't do it right now. I have to stay in office to make sure the transition is smoother, to make sure that this is all being done. In the interim, of course, it would have in effect gone back to the states that would have monkeyed around with it some more. You would have had Trump basically declaring martial law with his 10,000 troops at the Capitol. Pelosi would have been mad, even if she'd have thought of that as an option of going that way. It looked like they were going to be able to protect the place. And then there were so many of them with military training and with a plan to actually maraud and take it over. That's how it really happened. So to your hypothetical, I suppose it would be like a third world country. The first thing that would happen is they would
it's a bit too third world even for this crew. Although
they would protect the Capitol. Shots would be fired. Fort Sumter, right? Shots would be fired. They would try to take the U.S. Supreme Court building. There's probably tunnels and all those kinds of things so the Supreme Court justices could actually get out of there if it came to that situation like it did with Pence. And when the Supreme Court makes these rulings, of course, they think, of course, that could never, ever happen to them. And God forbid anything like that would ever, ever happen. There'd be tanks out in the street, I guess, to protect the U.S. Supreme Court. And it would be just an awful situation. One thing that you have to remember is that the president has this immunity, but other people don't. So either then or later, anyone who participated in this, they would say that this was so ultra virus. It was so beyond what anybody thought was their job. You go to West Point, you take a whole lot of courses like lawyers do and how the Constitution works, of what the role is of the military vis-a-vis civilian government, Mark, right? All of these people would be court-martialed, prosecuted for going along with this coup, even if the president could somehow walk away and technically, right, like Trump, not be indictable for it. So I don't think that's going to happen.
By the way,
I like your movie. I like your movie, but your movie is purely satire and wish fulfillment by some people who've just had enough of Trump the last decade. Haven't we had enough of Trump the last decade? And thank God for Kamala, who figured out how to stand up to him and tell him off, right? And
well, I mean, and bait him so effectively. It was just a remarkable. That's really, I thought, where her virtuosity from a debate standpoint just was. It seems so obvious. The rally. People leave the rallies early. People are bored. There's nothing for them. It seemed like such an obvious piece of bait, and he just went for it. And that speaks to what you're saying, which is, maybe he's just on a loop now, and he can't resist because he's just past his expiration date.
I don't think that she should debate him again. I think she should you had all these great political commentators on yesterday who know an awful lot more about this stuff. I'm as Sam Ervin of North Carolina used to say, I'm just a working lawyer, Mark. I'm just a working lawyer. But I don't think that she should debate him again, because she's ahead now. It's the person behind. It's the person who's losing. That's Trump right now, who's always eager for the debate. And if she does, she should look like she wants to debate him, not be scared to debate him. But I think the only place she should agree to debate him is NBC. There's a lot about. I have this memory of Clinton. Clinton was trying to sell a book after he was president. And he thought, everybody loves me. I can glad hand anybody. He went on Fox with an African-American reporter trying to sell this book of his. And when that African-American Fox reporter got done with him, he could barely show his face anywhere. They went around and they asked him every tough question. They did all that kind of stuff. Why on earth? I'm not saying there are similar hard questions you could ask Kamala, but does she want to find out how Fox is laying in wait for her? What booby trap they plan to spring on her? Why on earth would she do that? She's ahead. She did a great job.
Yeah, I agree. It's like take the W. I don't understand. It's a classic Democratic kind of thing. The Democrats do this, Hey, we won once. Let's win extra. Hey, guys, take the W and let's move on and win the election. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.